When one is engaged in transpartisan work, you're pretty much either the convener or the convened. The convened are the partisans, and I believe the shadow side of the partisan is a righteousness that demonizes. But we can rarely hang our hat on the righteousness of the head of one evil person. It takes a village to create evil as much as to create good. Hitler didn't act alone, neither did Martin Luther King, but it was their righteousness that others identified with, for good or for evil. But what about the shadow side of the convener? We have our own righteousness to deal with, and that's what I want to talk about today. I run the New Hampshire Listens at the Carsey School of Public Policy at the University of New Hampshire, and we're about 5 years into earning trust as a fair convener around the state. We cover a lot of different topics, from education to government efficiency, mental health, gambling, to dangerous intersections. So we bring particular engagement approaches, but our topics really vary widely. For my remarks today, I want to focus on one project that we've done recently, community police relations work in 3 New Hampshire seacoast towns and the University of New Hampshire. And for those of you who wonder about police community conversations in a majority white state, know that diversity is growing in New Hampshire, especially among our youth, and especially in some cities where up to 40% of students can be of color. So we needed these conversations just as much as the rest of the nation. My daughter is learning how to drive, and I recently found myself in the passenger seat resisting the use of the invisible brake on my side. And she asked me, "Mom, do I turn here?" And I said, "Well, you could." And she of course says, "Mom, you can't do that. You have to tell me." And she is so right. And I was like, "I'm sorry, Olivia, I live in the gray. I live in the gray." And I do, I live in the gray, but I don't drive in the gray. When I drive, I have certitude. And when we are conveners, we need to have certitude as well. And of course, when you're teaching your daughter how to drive. There are 3 fundamental issues that we need to address as conveners in order to do our best work as bridge builders and to keep our righteousness in check. First, put neutrality in a box. As conveners, the shadow side of our righteousness believes we have a personal gift for seeing all sides of the issue. We are, many of us, middle children, and so we have earned that gift. Still, we need to be clear about the boundaries of our neutrality. We put neutrality in a box because we are not neutral in general. We're not neutral to democracy or healthy children or fairness or puppies. We're neutral to solutions and pathways so that those can be determined in an effective shared space. And we should be more clear about that with our partners. In our community police relations work, there were community members who didn't want officers in uniform, much less carrying their guns. And while I'm sure there are circumstances where that might be warranted, in this case, that would amount to erasure. We would be asking people to show up and not be themselves. And I had certitude that I would not ask this of the officers. Similarly, we were not going to have this conversation without talking about bias. So my neutrality had boundaries in order to make mindful calls about bringing people to the table. Second, make room for the intolerant. As conveners, the shadow side of our righteousness believes we can create a process where no one will get hurt, and evil will be vanquished. But the doctor's oath to do no harm does not mean it won't hurt. As a convener, I can nudge us past our caricatures of each other. I can ask you to name the other as they would be named. We're not anti-life or anti-choice, for example. And those cheap tactics have no place in our efforts to understand each other. But we do need to understand our tolerance for intolerance. Otherwise, we simply gather those in the middle and think it's enough. So anticipate and be ready for disruptors. Their behavior comes from genuine passion and deeply held beliefs, or a desire to subvert the process. But be clear about your legal and civil boundaries to keep folks in the room as long as possible. What would that look like to make room for the intolerant? So cameras may be in the room, but not in my face. Guns might be in the room as well. And how do you name that in a way that can decrease the power of a gun to bully? And this is changing all the time. And it matters that most of the people practicing open carry are white. Passion and anger in my voice and on my face and in my body needs to be okay. Not lead to violence, but especially if the person is emotional, is a person of color or a woman, we see that differently and we need to make room for that. People come in armed and armored emotionally and physically, but our ground rules need to be flexible and clear enough to hold a difficult space. In our community police relations work, a lot of folks attended so they can explain the facts so you will understand. But we make different meaning of the facts. One white man joined a group late and with his finger pointed in the face of the officers and asked them to explain Ferguson. He refused to sit down. He ignored the facilitator. Everyone became defensive and polite conversation was disrupted. And it was painful. And I couldn't change that. And that was not my job. But we got through it. That was my job. So making room for the intolerant makes the work harder, but maybe more generative. Finally, know thyself. As conveners, the shadow side of our righteousness believes we're less susceptible to the righteousness of others. But what is political and partisan work but the centers of power of our communities, our states, and our nation? We see ourselves as grassroots, but we are working with the grass tops, and there's a powerful allure to the fast-moving cool people in politics. How can we know ourselves in order to hold the internal tensions that we can be of service? Who keeps us honest? This is not drive-by engagement. I needed to put in the time over time so I could listen for the ouch on all sides. That was work I had to start well before the conversations took place. In our community police relations work, as much as I got into the issues with more of an inclination to address injustice for community members, gaining the trust and partnership of chiefs of police was compelling. My best friend named this for me, not in a way that accused me, but in a way that called me to attend to it. And while the chiefs would not describe themselves as the fast-moving cool people that join New Hampshire every 4 years, there's no doubt that there's power there. Knowing myself meant building genuine relationships with the grassroots and the grass tops in the community and in law enforcement. This meant holding the tensions so I could be true to those relationships on all sides and help identify productive steps. So put neutrality in a box, make room for the intolerant, and know yourself. This sounds like a philosophy, but each of these takes skill and clarity and knowledge to scaffold you for the work. Some of the people who participated in the community police relations conversations that we had were the same students who said to me during midterm elections, voting is a white space, it's a middle class space, it's an old space, and I don't want to have anything to do with that. My first reaction was, okay, but you still have to vote. I hope someday that changes for them, but in the meantime, if I can keep my own righteousness as a convener in check and keep neutrality in a box, make room for the intolerant, and know myself, then maybe I can engage those who are checking out of the process of our democracy. Thank you.